Rome hailed Julius Caesar as the champion who carried civilization into the so-called barbarian lands of Gaul. What the Senate chose not to praise were the means by which that victory was secured. From 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar's Gallic campaigns elevated him into one of Rome's most celebrated generals. Yet beneath the triumphs and accolades lay a program of calculated brutality that, by any modern definition, would be judged as war crimes. The conquest that forged Caesar's reputation rested on mass slaughter, intentional starvation, widespread enslavement, and the merciless execution of hostages. These were not accidental byproducts of warfare, but deliberate strategies designed to terrorize entire peoples into submission. As Rome feasted and staged games, Gaul itself had been reduced to a vast charnel house. The scale of the bloodshed was so immense that even Caesar's political rivals in the Senate attempted to call him to account, though ambition and power ultimately eclipsed justice. Mass killings during the Gallic campaigns. Caesar's Gallic Wars began in 58 BCE. With the migration of the Helvetii, a Celtic people from what is now Switzerland. Roughly 368,000 individuals attempted to pass through Roman territory in search of new lands. Caesar intercepted them at the Battle of Bibracte and destroyed them without restraint. When the survivors later returned home to conduct a census, only 110,000 remained. In a single campaign, more than 200,000 men, women, and children, mostly civilians engaged in a peaceful migration, had been killed or displaced. Those Germanic tribes who crossed the Rhine into Gaul met an even grimmer fate. When the Usipetes and Tencteri, driven from their homelands by stronger neighbors, sought refuge in Gaul, Caesar answered with annihilation. While negotiations for surrender were underway and tribal envoys remained inside his camp, Caesar ordered a sudden assault. The timing was chosen for maximum destruction. At dawn, Roman cavalry descended upon the Germanic encampments, slaughtering warriors, elders, women, and children alike. Ancient sources claim that 430,000 people were killed in this single action. The massacre was so complete that the Rhine itself was said to be choked with corpses. Caesar recorded these events openly in his own commentaries, framing them as military necessity. Yet the magnitude of the violence far exceeded any genuine requirement for victory. Entire tribes were wiped out not because they posed a serious threat, but because their destruction served as a warning to all others. What Rome later called pacification was, in reality, systematic ethnic cleansing carried out with ruthless efficiency. The message to Gaul was unmistakable: resistance meant extinction. According to ancient historians such as Plutarch and Appian, the total death toll of Caesar's campaigns reached 1 million. While modern scholars treat ancient figures cautiously, they agree that the loss of life was catastrophic. Before Caesar's arrival, Gaul's population is estimated at between 3 and 6 million. By the end of his conquest, between 1/6 and 1/3 of that population had been killed. This was not conquest. It was annihilation. Deliberate starvation of besieged tribes. Caesar understood that hunger could be wielded as effectively as any blade. During the Great Gallic Revolt of 52 BCE, the rebel leader Vercingetorix adopted a scorched earth strategy, burning towns and crops to deny supplies to the Romans. Caesar countered by focusing on the single fortified city Vercingetorix agreed to defend, Avaricum, modern Bourges, renowned as one of the finest cities in Gaul. The siege that followed revealed Caesar's willingness to weaponize starvation against civilians. Avaricum was naturally protected by rivers and marshes, with only one narrow approach. While Vercingetorix's army camped 15 miles away, harassing Roman supply lines, Caesar ordered the construction of massive siege works. For 25 days, both sides endured severe hardship. Roman soldiers survived largely on meat, a rare substitute for the grain they normally consumed. Still, Caesar refused to abandon the siege, knowing the 40,000 people trapped inside the city would exhaust their food long before his disciplined legions broke. Inside Avaricum, conditions became desperate. Refugees from nearby regions had crowded into the city, stretching already scarce supplies beyond their limits. Women, children, and the elderly slowly starved as defenders watched helplessly from the walls. When Roman siege towers finally breached the defenses during a rainstorm, the legionaries, hardened by weeks of hunger and suffering, showed no restraint. By Caesar's own admission, his troops slaughtered all 40,000 inhabitants. Only 800 escaped. The city once celebrated as the jewel of the Bituriges became a vast graveyard. The massacre at Avaricum was no tragic accident of siege warfare. Caesar had intentionally starved the population into weakness before ordering the assault. The destruction of civilian food supplies, the rejection of surrender, and the total slaughter that followed all reflected a calculated brutality meant to shatter Gallic resistance. And it succeeded. The horror of Avaricum spread across Gaul as a grim warning of the fate awaiting any tribe that dared defy Rome. Enslavement of surrendered populations. Ancient accounts speak with one voice. During Caesar's campaigns, roughly 1 million Gauls were sold into slavery. This astonishing number does not reflect battlefield deaths, but the intentional enslavement of defeated peoples who had surrendered or been taken captive. For those who survived Caesar's conquests, slavery was the expected outcome, serving both strategic and economic ends. In 56 BCE, after the Veneti, a formidable seafaring tribe, were defeated in a naval engagement, Caesar ordered the execution of their entire council of elders and sold the remaining population into bondage. When the Achuatusi capitulated following a siege, Caesar accepted their surrender only to immediately enslave all 53,000 survivors, selling them in a single transaction to slave dealers trailing the Roman army. Across Gaul, conquered peoples were reduced to commodities, distributed as rewards to soldiers or auctioned to fill Caesar's war treasury. The financial incentive behind this mass enslavement was substantial. Roman commanders were expected to share the profits from selling captives with the Senate. Yet Caesar's own commentaries conspicuously avoid mentioning such dealings. By reporting that prisoners had been killed rather than enslaved, Caesar was able to retain the profits for himself and his legions. This calculated misrepresentation financed his campaigns and enriched his troops, securing their loyalty. Beyond profit, the dispersal of enslaved Gauls throughout the empire served a calculated strategic aim. By scattering defeated tribes across the Mediterranean, Caesar ensured they could never regroup or reclaim their ancestral homelands. Communities were shattered, their languages and customs dissolved as they were absorbed into Roman households, mines, and estates. For the Gauls, enslavement meant more than the loss of liberty, it meant the erasure of identity and culture. Execution of hostages for political leverage. Caesar's reliance on hostages exposes the deliberate cruelty at the heart of his Gallic campaigns. When tribal leaders approached him to negotiate alliances or surrender terms, he routinely seized their children as guarantees of obedience. Any hint of disloyalty was met with imprisonment or execution of these hostages. Negotiation became extortion, and alliance was reduced to submission enforced by terror. The fate of Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader who united the tribes in their final resistance, exemplifies Caesar's merciless treatment of defeated foes. After the fall of Alesia in 52 BCE, Vercingetorix surrendered himself to spare his remaining followers from massacre. He was immediately shackled and sent to Rome, where he spent 6 years confined in the Tullianum, a subterranean prison reserved for Rome's most dangerous enemies. Kept alive for a single purpose, Vercingetorix was displayed during Caesar's triumph in 46 BCE. Paraded through Rome in chains, he was shown to the cheering crowds as living proof of Caesar's dominance. Once the procession ended and the celebrations faded, he was returned to the Tullianum and executed. Denied burial, his death was meant to stand as a warning to all who might challenge Roman authority. The fate awaiting lesser hostages was no less brutal. At Uxellodunum, the final stronghold of Gallic resistance, Caesar chose terror over massacre. After the city surrendered due to thirst, he ordered the mutilation of all defenders. These survivors were then released to roam Gaul, living testaments to Rome's vengeance. Unable to wield weapons or work their land, they were condemned to beg for survival, broken symbols of the cost of defiance. Judged by modern standards, would Caesar still be hailed as a great leader, or condemned as a war criminal whose ambition sanctioned extreme brutality? The methods he employed in Gaul established precedents that would reverberate through centuries of warfare, revealing how the pursuit of glory can so easily become a system of mass destruction.